The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
The last couple of weeks, we've been talking a little bit about pain and how to work with pain and unpleasant sensation when it arises, just the different strategies. I thought I'd explore a little more on that around what it means to heal and what it means to feel whole. I ran across a couple lines from actual doctor-patient records from clients. I thought I'd share a little bit. This is not encouraging. The patient has been depressed since she started seeing me in 1993. The patient has chest pain if she lies on her left side for over a year. Of course, the doctors read each other's notes, so this one is between you and me. We ought to be able to get this lady pregnant. Examination of genitalia reveals that he is circus-sized. It does not inspire huge confidence. But I wanted to chat a little bit about how when we talk about cultivating mindfulness, cultivating non-judging awareness, how do you apply it when you're challenged? And of course, one of the ways that you're most challenged is in the direct experience of strong, consistent, unpleasant sensation. And it points toward a question, which is, what does it mean to feel whole? What does it mean to really be healthy? Does it mean not feeling pain, or does it mean something else? So I'd like to talk a little bit of how, when you're practicing meditation, you're really practicing a form of self-diagnosis. I'd like to review some of the strategies for healing and working with difficulty when it arises, and talk about some of the characteristics of what it means to feel whole and some of the strategies you can employ. It's important to remember that this practice is a reality-based practice. It's not about looking for the positive or the negative. It's around looking at what's real. That's at the very root of what it means to cultivate mindfulness. What is actually true? And as you know from your practice that you go through sort of this filter of seeing through your stories and your preferences and your embellishments and your conditioning, and you begin to come more and more in contact with what is actually true. And what is actually true becomes more and more of a refuge, a place where you can really rest your heart and rest your awareness. And part of this, of course, is recognizing the fundamental fact of reality of impermanence. That anything born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. A psychologist who I met, he was kind of late in his career, said how when he's with a client and either he gets stuck with the client or he gets bored with them, turning their story over and over again, he says, I just ask, how do you feel about the fact you're going to die? And that really is the essential question. Remembering impermanence. We get so stuck in thinking that this human life is permanent, or there's some preferred way of being in this life. And we also get really caught when we're experiencing strong pain and believing that too is impermanent, and it's solid. And from our exploration, we know if when you look really, really closely, you begin to see that everything is in a state of change. From a distance, it may look solid, but when you really explore, it is constantly shifting and changing. You know that feeling when you're in contact with someone who you're very close to, who's sick or getting very old or dying. Your reaction is a mirror of your perception of reality. Some of us ignore it. Some of us find ourselves agitated or angry. Some of us freeze up. Some of us are just caught in hypervigilance around this fact of mortality and impermanence. But of course, when we look at, through this lens of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology, this was really the core of the Buddha's inquiry, seeing into this nature of impermanence. And it's said that the teachings that he developed that came from his own direct experience were very much like going to a physician. First, the diagnosis. And his diagnosis is that stress and suffering and dissatisfaction is part of the human condition. And then the second is locating the cause. What is the cause of that suffering and that dissatisfaction? It has to do with clinging, with attachment, with false identification. When you have a false identification to who you are, thinking this isn't going to change. So the third step after diagnosis and the cause is find the cure. What's the cure? And the cure here is recognizing that whatever you're holding on to, you can let go. It's possible to let go. And then fourth, you prescribe the treatment, the course of healing, which are the practices, the observations, the restraints that will support you in being more and more free in your life. So these are the foundational qualities of the practice. In any given moment in your practice of recognizing where there's suffering, recognizing where there's some form of stress or dissatisfaction, you're self-diagnosing. There's something between me and feeling happy right now. And then the cause. So what is that? What am I holding on to? What's the perception that is keeping me tight? And then the cure, when you find that, can I let that go? Can I soften in that in some way? And then the course of treatment, how do I hold this? How do I move forward in my life? So that's really what we're doing in many ways in our practice. We're in a process of self-diagnosis. But when we're doing self-diagnosis without awareness, then you're just simply running away from pain and running toward pleasure. It's without awareness. And so we have this beautiful articulation, again, that came directly from the Buddha's experience, the articulation of the middle way. Through the course of his practice, great austerities at one point, recognizing that all this denial of the body and the senses, it was creating experiences but not insight. They weren't liberating. But also indulging the senses wasn't liberating either. And so this teaching of not too tight, not too loose, finding that middle way. And noticing in any given moment, are you holding on? Are you pushing away? Or can you find that sweet spot where you're simply neither indulging nor denying, but being present to the aliveness of what's right here without adding a story to it? Really subtle stuff. but incredibly powerful. And so when you're in pain and experiencing really strong discomfort, of course you notice the clinging. Either you're fixating on the pain or you're fixating on some possible cure you haven't thought of, or you're in denial. So the more you pay attention in your practice and in your life, or if you're working with strong unpleasant sensation, you begin to notice these three fundamental energies that completely interfere with perceiving life in its reality. They're classically referred to as the three poisons of greed, of hatred, and delusion. And again, it's the unconscious relationship to the present moment. We talked earlier of how all sensation falls into three categories. It's unpleasant, you don't like it. It's pleasant, you want more. It's neutral, you're bored. And so we react to those pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations all the time. With mindfulness, non-judging awareness, it opens up this amazing doorway to new, unforeseen possibilities. And delusion is a really interesting one. Delusion or confusion is believing something is true when it isn't, or believing something isn't true when it is. And this sense of, again, falling into this trance of feeling that this body is permanent and it's always going to be here. Pretty deluded. But of course, it's something we all just fall into quite naturally. So there's the story of Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was considered one of the great sages of India, and fascinating story about him. When he was 18 years old, an uncle who he loved very dearly suddenly died. And it so shocked him that he was just bereft. He couldn't figure out where did he go. And so he came home from school early one day, and he lay down on his sleeping mat, and he just, wow. It's like taking a splinter out of your brain, isn't it? We should just sit here for a while with that. Talk about pleasant sensation. Wow. Oh, that's so sweet. I'd referenced a talk. I was just listening to the podcast recently of this amplified pain syndrome, which happens for some people and a lot of kids. And they have so much pain that they become less and less active, and it amplifies the pain more and more. And they're finding the best course of study now is actually immersing yourself in pain, but not feeding it. So the kids do this like 8 hours a day of intensive, really painful workout, but they're not allowed to talk about the pain, and their pain levels drop dramatically. And what we've found in the opioid crisis is that opioids actually, they lessen your reactivity to pain. They actually increase and amplify your sensitivity. So it's this play of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensation, and how you relate to it is so interesting. We're really learning a lot. So Ramana Maharshi came home from school one day, and he was 17, 18 years old, and he lay down on his mat, and he went into this really deep inquiry is, well, what happens when you die? Because he just wanted to know. And he had a profoundly deep shift in consciousness that really, really changed his life quite dramatically. And he went on to teach, and he developed what's called inquiry meditation, where he would say, if you consistently dwell on the question, who am I, with sincerity, that it will begin to kind of unpeel the conditioned self and reveal the unconditioned. So he lived near a mountain called Arunachala, and he stayed there his whole life. But people would come and visit him, and he would give these talks and just hang out with them. But there's a story one day of this one really, really kind of healthy yogi guy was there, and this really healthy guy kept insisting that he wanted to tell Ramana about the diet that he was doing and the exercise that he was doing. He was really quite a vital guy, but it was really important for him to know everything he learned around being really robust and healthy and vital. And Ramana sort of entertained him after a while. And he said, "What you're doing is wonderful. You will have the best looking corpse in the graveyard." So this reality of impermanence, when we remember, it informs our life in a really powerful way, and it doesn't have to be depressing. It actually is an invitation to savor what's here, to really enjoy what is here. But you may have noticed that when you are overcome with unpleasant sensation, whether it be physical pain or emotional pain, have you noticed how your mind will scour for the story about how it got there and all the possible solutions of how you can nuke it and make it go away? It's a natural part of how the mind reacts to unpleasant sensation. And we are biologically trained to avoid pain and seek pleasure. It's part of our evolution, but it's also part of the trap. It's when we can stop and really investigate what's between you and feeling free, where we can begin to see more clearly and be less confused in life. So if I were to summarize a little bit of the healing process that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, it'd be some of these points. The first is when you are caught in unpleasant sensation, is to notice your story versus what is actually happening. And this can be quite powerful because the mind naturally catastrophizes around unpleasant sensation. Notice if you're adding suffering through your story. We talked about the second arrow, that when you're experiencing unpleasant sensation, are you adding judgment or blame or aversion? And is that helping or is that hindering the healing process? In the past, I've shared this story of an old monk whose body was decaying. And it was quite a gruesome sight when he was visited by other monks who were attending him. And he was radiant. He just had his luminosity in his eyes. And they asked him, "What is your practice? What are you doing?" And he repeated back one of the key teachings and practice. He said, "I keep my awareness in the body, in and of itself, putting aside greed, fear, and concern for the world." So in essence, he was awake in the present moment without adding anything to it. Very easy to say that, but as you know, very, very challenging to actually practice it. But those times when I'm racked with a migraine, and I can just ask myself, can I be with this without adding a story? In those moments, there's a sense of actually being with it. It's just sensation. Another thing we talked about is, again, calling on this refuge of non-judging awareness or mindfulness. And that is to say, to look at what's happening without any judgment whatsoever. And so you can ask yourself, can I just be with it? The analogy I love, and sometimes I'll explore this with physical sensation, or if there's strong emotion, is to imagine I'm just sitting on a park bench with the sensation, just hanging out. I'm not trying to change it or alter it in any way, but we're just sharing the park bench. And as simple as that sounds, sometimes it's quite profound. It oftentimes amplifies my discomfort with that unpleasantness. But just being with it, something might soften a little. Now, a big thing, we've explored a number of different strategies in the past. But when you are visited by unpleasant sensation, notice what you have control over. And quite often, when you fixate on the unpleasant sensation, there's a sense of catastrophizing, of being flooded or overwhelmed. But you might notice you actually have control over some things. You have control over your attention. You can instead of fixating on the unpleasant, you can focus your attention on a neutral place. You can focus on just one breath at a time. You can focus on scanning the neutral and the pleasant sensations. And sometimes that will shift your relationship when you realize you actually have some resources available to you that you didn't when you were simply in pure reactivity. We also talked about what it's like when you call on loving presence. Again, when you're flooded with unpleasantness, we kind of shut down, we clench, we get small. But remembering that this practice has two wings. One is the wing of awareness, seeing very clearly what's there. And the other is the wing of compassion or loving presence. When you find yourself caught in unpleasantness, what would happen if you held it as if you would a small child that was in pain? Or what would happen if you held that in the same way you might hold an animal that was suffering? To give yourself that experience can be quite powerful. Remembering, not so easy. And there are two more things that can be very helpful. And that is noticing how when you are gripped, how your sense of self gets very small. It's a natural clench. It's a self-protective quality. And when you can shift your awareness to include others, the practice of Tonglen, of just reminding yourself, other people feel this too. That whatever you're experiencing, other people at this very moment on this planet are feeling this too. That as a profound way of opening the frame a little bit. And very interesting, there were some very interesting studies for those who are caught in chronic pain or just caught in chronic conditions. One of the most powerful ways to shift your relationship to it is to support other people who are suffering. A good example, if you've ever met someone much younger than you who's going through a horrible breakup in a relationship, chances are you might feel a lot of empathy for them because chances are you went through that too. In that same way, when you are actively supporting other people who are suffering, it's a way of taking that pain and serving through that lens of compassion. That's a profound way of shifting awareness. If you have been struggling with something one of the most powerful things you can do is to help others who are suffering, because chances are you may have had some life experience that might be helpful for them, or for them just to know someone has suffered as well can be tremendously helpful. So as we like to say, it's not what's happening as much as it is how you're relating to it that makes the difference. And part of this element of delusion or confusion is holding some sense of what it means to be fully whole and alive. And quite often we hold this as some sense of who we're supposed to be in this life. All I have to do is look at Facebook and look at the presentations of everyone's perfect life. You know, one of my oldest jokes is a time in my life when I was really into macrobiotics. You know, the macrobiotic diet. I was really, really into it. Basically, the macrobiotic diet came from Japan, and so you eat everything in season from like a 40-mile radius, which does not include Pizza Hut and things like that. Basically, it's whatever your great-great-parents ate, that the great-great-grandparents ate, that's what you would eat. So I was macrobiotic for many, many years, studied very carefully. I was macroneurotic for a couple more years, and then a full-blown macropsychotic for a couple of years after that. And one of the interesting things is that, you know, part of the idea of macrobiotics is you have the yang foods and the yin foods. So, like the most contracting food would be like salt, you know, and meat. And then the most expensive food would be LSD and sugar. So the idea is you want to like reel it in, you know. So you're reeling in the extremes. You're eating in the middle. But what happens for many people is when you get really fixated on this, that band gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and you get more and more rigid as you're eating. I was completely caught up in it. And I got a blood test, and I found out I was borderline anemic, which really frightened me. So I doubled down on eating really, really pure and really, really clean, and I got another blood test, and I was borderline anemic. And it was a real point of fixation for me. And then one of the people kind of testing my blood said, "Do you have any British, you know, British blood in your background?" I said, "Well, yeah, actually, there's a whole side of my family that's from Yorkshire." And I said, "Oh, well then, people from England have a different normal for anemia." And I realized, oh, I'm normal. But we have this clench that there's something wrong. And we tend to live by that clench. And I always love that inquiry. You know, what if everything's already okay? And to push it a little bit further, that beautiful inquiry from Locke Kelly, you know, whenever you find yourself caught in that clench, to ask yourself, what if this is not a problem to be solved? Boy, does that soften the clench when you hang out with that for a while. So when you look at what it means to be healthy and whole, it gets a little complex. My wife has a genetic condition. Something passed from the female to the male to the female, all through the generations. So she and all her female cousins have this kind of genetic disorder that has different manifestations. And when we found that out, it was really quite challenging for me. I've been blessed with good genes. Other than my migraines, I've been really healthy. And I actually looked this up last night. My last night in the hospital was 22,914 days ago, when I was born. I found that out in 0.52 seconds, thanks to Google, by the way. But my wife's condition can't be cured. Maybe there's some huge breakthrough in the CRISPR technology with gene modification. But does that mean that she's not whole? And this points to something really, really interesting, which is, what are you, really? And when you explore this inquiry of who and what you are, it becomes pretty clear that you're not the body. If you have a leg amputated, does that mean that you're less here? I don't think so. And it also points toward a real distinction around happiness. There's happiness that's based on external conditions, which is referred to as dukkha. And then there's the happiness that is unconditioned. It's possible to be happy regardless of what the external conditions are. And that's referred to as sukha. So the more you begin to practice mindfulness and apply it in your life, the more you begin to recognize that what you're really looking for is happiness that is not dependent on externals. That's what's possible. Not easy, but possible. As Darwin said, it's not the smartest or the strongest that survive. It's the ones that are the quickest to adapt to change. My translation to that is, it's the ones who are the most aware. That when you are aware, when you're seeing clearly, then you can self-diagnose, and then you can change and adapt, rather than staying calcified and stuck in a point of view that might not be seen clearly. So someone once asked me, can I heal myself with meditation? And I've heard myself saying, well, you may not be able to heal your body, but it can definitely help you heal how you're relating to what's going on. Maybe you've noticed this when you've seen people in your life who have gotten old and gotten sick and moved toward their departure, that while their body may have been decaying, that they were actually happier. I noticed this with my uncle many, many, many years ago. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he relaxed. He became this kind of radiant guy who just seemed to be really savoring the days that he had left. Much of my training is in yoga. And in yoga there is this whole articulation of the koshas, which are referred to as the bodies or the sheaths of who you are. There's the Annamaya kosha, which is a physical body. So it's actually translated as the food stuff. It's the body that consumes food. And then the pranamaya kosha, which is the energy body, which is the vital life force that animates who you are. And then the manomaya kosha is the mental body. That's the sense of I and mine. And the vijnanamaya kosha is the wisdom faculty. It's the intellect and your capacity to discriminate. And then Anandamaya kosha, it's the innermost recognition of truth, sometimes referred to as the bliss body. So can the physical body be ill and the other bodies be whole? Seems to be yes. And just as my uncle became more present and alive when his physical body started to move toward its end, we can also take steps to recognize impermanence and cultivate that sense of recognizing what is true and taking refuge in that. So I've shared the 5 daily recollections before, and I thought we'll kind of close with a meditation on these again. And we'll do a little other practice just as we close in these final minutes. So if you like, you can close your eyes and take a moment just to sense where you feel the breath inside right now. And just sense the quality of presence here. Sensing the physical body. And sensing, however you may perceive it, as the energy body. The aliveness, the pulse, the tingling, the life force that animates this physical form. Sensing the mental body, this perception of I and mine. So awareness of your uniqueness, your separateness. And sensing, however you may perceive it, the wisdom body, your capacity to discriminate, to see more clearly. And however you may perceive it right now, this sense of what we might call the bliss body, that deep innermost recognition of truth and presence and beauty and joy. And just reflecting on these 5 daily recognitions. I am of the nature to age and decay. I have not gone beyond aging and decay. I am of the nature to become ill or injured. I have not gone beyond illness or injury. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond death. All that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. I am born of my actions. I am related to my actions. I am supported by my actions. And any thoughts, words, or deeds I do, skillful or unskillful, those I will inherit. And sensing this wing of your practice, the capacity to see clearly. And sensing this complementary wing, this wing of accessing loving presence, in these final moments, you might take some time to reflect on this quality of loving presence. As you breathe in, breathing in this moment. As you exhale, relax. And breathing in your capacity to see this life clearly. And breathing out, sensing this quality of being awake to loving presence. And you might reflect on these classic phrases. Just either repeating these words internally or finding whatever words resonate for you. May I feel peace. May I feel happy. May I feel safe from inner and outer harm. May I feel free from suffering. And sensing if there's someone in your life, or you might just broadcast this out, your well-wishing. May all beings feel peace. May all beings feel happy. May all beings feel safe from inner and outer harm. May all beings feel free from suffering. Gently now deepening the breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. This practice of cultivating wisdom, of accessing loving presence, has the capacity for immeasurable healing. It truly does. Thank you for coming, and with all these practices that are available to us, perhaps though nothing may heal you more directly than having a cookie. I saw the cart go by. Have a great night. I'll see you next week.